So today we're going to talk about a topic that comes up pretty often nowadays, and that's a orphaned 401k. And what is an orphaned 401k? An orphaned 401k is a 401k that you had at a previous employer. Now you've moved on to another job. Maybe you've had the unfortunate experience of being laid off, or you've gone through a merger. There's a lot of mergers that happen with the companies in the economy today. And there are these 401ks that are at a former employer that are kind of just sitting there. Now, what we find in talking to a lot of people is that those orphan 401ks just kind of sit there in many cases for years and they're not really managed. So we want to talk about, in these scenarios, if you go through a layoff or you have an old orphan 401k, what are some of the options that you should be looking at or things that you should consider? So let's start with the first scenario of if you go through a layoff. Now, unfortunately, what we've seen in the U.S. economy recently is that unemployment has gone up a little bit. It's now above 4%, still pretty low, but it is starting to creep up. We're starting to see more and more layoffs in the economy. So when a client comes to see us after a layoff, one of the first things that we want to talk about, in addition to their 401k, if they have choices with that, or they will have choices with that, is making sure that you have really good health care. You know, people will sometimes talk about market downturns and how that impacts them. Well, if the market goes down, I fundamentally believe, and certainly history proves, that the market is eventually going to come back. If you have a healthcare issue and you don't have really good healthcare, that can devastate you financially for the rest of your life. So if you are in a scenario where you have been recently laid off, or if you get laid off, one of the first things that you need to really think through is what your healthcare benefits are. And in most cases, there's not that many choices, but let's go through a couple of them. The first one is, in some cases, and everyone's situation is going to be different, some companies, when you go through a layoff, are going to offer you potentially healthcare for a certain period of time that they may or may not supplement, and then they will offer you what's called COBRA. And COBRA is where you have an ability to extend your current healthcare coverage. Now, the costs typically go up, and it's typically pretty high. So hopefully you're in a position where you've had some savings that you've put aside where you can pay for this. And what COBRA is really intended to be is sort of a bridge to get you from the current job that you may have been laid off from to the next job. Now, one of the other scenarios, if you're married, is if your spouse is working and they have coverage, you may be able to be added onto their coverage. And then typically, in these cases, that's probably going to be more advantageous to you and your family from a cost perspective to go on your spouse's healthcare benefits, if that's an option, than to go over to a COBRA plan. But regardless of the situation you're in, you need to have good healthcare. We have a healthcare professional on our staff, because healthcare is such an important aspect of people in their working years and certainly in their retirement years. And if you're in one of these scenarios too, people are, a lot of cases today, working longer. If you're 65 or older, you can also go onto Medicare, which is an option that if you're under 65, you're not going to have. So again, healthcare, very important in these situations of a layoff. And then Social Security, if you're 62 or above, what's the timing of Social Security? Well, for some people, if they're laid off, they may go back and get another job. They may not go back to work. They may decide to retire. And so the timing of how you take Social Security, when you take that, is really important. One of the things that we do at Beacon is that we offer a free Social Security maximization report. So if you're in this scenario where you've been laid off, and you've got a choice to make with Social Security, we can actually give you some really good information to help you get the most out of Social Security. So again, healthcare, Social Security choices, in the aspect of if you're being laid off, or you've been laid off, or you're going through a merger, are really, really important. Now let's talk about like the last component, and that is what I kind of started with an orphan 401k. If you've gone through a merger with a company, if you've been laid off, or you've changed jobs, and you've got a 401k, again, referred to as an orphan 401k, that is from an old employer that's just sitting out there, what do you do with that? Well, what you want to look at is what are the choices that you have within the 401k. Now, in some cases, in fact, most cases, probably the cost that you're paying within the 401k are very low. But you may be in a scenario as well, though, where you also have very few choices in terms of your investment options. 401ks are benefits that good companies have that they want to, attract and retain really good employees, and they want you to plan for your future, so they offer a 401k. But typically, in most cases, there's very limited choices when in fact there are thousands upon thousands of different investment choices. So one of the things that we encourage people to look at with an orphan 401k is to at least sit down with a financial professional to look at if there are other investment options that you may have now that you're no longer with that company, because one of the options that you will have is if you've been laid off, and in some cases if you've gone through a merger, you can actually roll that 401k over to an outside professional financial advisor and probably get more choices. One of the things you also want to consider within that 401k is if you do roll that over to a professional financial advisor, what are the tax strategy options that you may have? That doesn't mean that you do any tax planning, but we think tax planning is important. I grew up on a farm, so I use the example of, would you rather pay taxes on the seed or the harvest? Now, most 401ks are tax deferred, and I think that the financial industry in some regards has done a disservice to the consumer, because we've sort of educated our people and clients to defer money or to divert taxes and things like 401ks. And I think in a lot of cases, people interpret tax deferral as tax savings. Well, tax deferral isn't tax savings. It's really just tax deferral. Eventually, you're going to pay taxes on that. And the bigger that grows, the more taxes you're going to owe. And so Roth conversions or tax strategies, and there are many of them, are at least things, in my opinion, for you to consider. And if you've got an orphan 401k and you can roll that over to an outside IRA and work with a financial professional, the truth is that you may be able to deploy some tax strategies that aren't going to eliminate taxes, but in fact are going to help you save taxes over time. Now, tax planning, like anything, takes time. You typically don't want to make a decision where you would convert, for example, everything in lump sum. You really want a solid plan that over a period of time, you're going to be able to be efficient and reducing the amount of taxes that you're going to pay on that. But regardless of what you decide, if you've gone through a layoff, you're going through a merger, or you just changed employers and you've got one of these outside 401ks or orphan 401ks, you should at least sit down with a financial professional and learn what your options are. A bad option, in my opinion, is just to sort of leave it there and forget it. You want to understand what your options are. And one of the other things that Beacon offers is what we call a free financial planning checkup. And this is sort of just a deep dive into what you have, whether it's an orphan 401k or other investments. It's an x-ray on things like risk and fees and income and taxes. And it gives you an idea if what you're holding is a true reflection of who you are as an investor. So if anything that I've said leads you to say, hey, that's something I kind of want to get answered for me and my family, or at least understand what our options are, give us a call. We'd love to sit down and visit with you and your family and at least go through what your options are. Well, thanks for listening. We really appreciate your time today. If you've not subscribed, hit the subscribe button below, and we'll talk to you soon.